Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your new, or perhaps your familiar, safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very, very seriously, but not too seriously. After an unexpected 2-week hiatus, which I will address in this episode, I have had sufficient time to gather my thoughts on the situation in Afghanistan, to address the broader implications of impeachment in the United States of America, and to disclose, yes, dear listener, part of my hiatus was that I got COVID. And to add a little levity to the episode, the University of Tennessee played a football game. We will discuss as much. On to the main attraction.
Act 1 Afghanistan.
I've had a number of people ask me if I was going to do a piece on Afghanistan. I wanted to wait until I could actually collect my thoughts and specifically what I saw on television, the withdrawal of the U.S. forces from Afghanistan. I was shocked at how similar it was to the U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam. Go on YouTube, type in the fall of Saigon. Watch those videos from the fall of Saigon, the U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam after having been there for close to 15 years. I say it on this podcast all the time. It is a fact of life. Those who do not understand their own history, their personal history, their regional history, their national history, their ancestral history, these people, us, are doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. We believe ourselves to be these complicated creatures, frankly, because of the thoughts that we have in our head. That's it. The thoughts that we have in our head and the thoughts that we feel like we cannot control, driving us into these infinite iterations of complexity. But it simply isn't true. These are just thoughts in our head. And frankly, many of them are a product of repetition. The memories that we have where we believe we've made a mistake, where, again, whether or not it's factual, we believe something to be true, and then we start developing patterns because of it. We certainly do this as individuals. I certainly do this as an individual. That's part of growing up, being able to identify these memories, being able to identify these patterns, and break them. But good God, do we not do it as a population of people, as a community, as a state, as a region, as a nation. I can't look at anything that's happening in Afghanistan and not think this is exactly like what happened in Vietnam. This is exactly like what happened in Vietnam. We are repeating the exact same conduct, the exact same results, the exact same shame, the exact same guilt. If you want a thorough review of exactly what happened in Afghanistan, look no further than the documentary that was on PBS that was done by Ken Burns on Vietnam. It was roughly 8 or 9 2-hour episodes, and it went through the entire history of not only the struggle in Vietnam with Western powers, but how the U.S. became involved, and then all of the lies that were told once the U.S. became entrenched in that war. Within a 50-year time span, we made the exact same mistake twice. And what's so ironic about it is that the people that we ended up fighting are us. The Vietnamese were us. The Afghans are us. You and I didn't hold a flintlock musket. We didn't have to throw tea over the side of a boat to protest the British. You and I didn't have to lay down when the king told us to lay down. Our ancestors did that. Our ancestors got tired of it. Our ancestors were the ones who threw tea over the side of a boat. Our ancestors are the ones who carried along those flintlock rifles when they didn't have 2 nickels to rub together in order to revolt against the British. A couple hundred years later, we're fighting ourselves in Vietnam. 50 years after that, we're fighting ourselves in Afghanistan. One of the most remarkable lines in the documentary that was done by Ken Burns on the Vietnam War was from a Vietnam veteran from the United States, from the southern part of the United States. I believe the man was raised in Mississippi. And he is in Vietnam in early 1970 or 1971, and he's in southern Vietnam. You see the corollaries here? A man from the South who is now in the military in southern Vietnam dealing with people in South Vietnam. And these people, even by Vietnamese standards, are hicks. These are rural, agrarian people who are even looked down upon within Vietnamese society. And here this vet is talking about the fact, this is me. I'm looking into a lens, a mirror of myself. The stigma of an agrarian, of a poor community, hell, that's what he had grown up in the rural South in the 1950s and 60s. People that had a chip on their shoulder because of it, he was looking directly into their eyes every day as he was marching through those rice paddies. Where did the U.S. experience so many of its problems? That's right, in southern Vietnam, with these type of people. Ignorant and proud and willing to fight to the last. This sense of pride is held in the southern United States to this day. And it was that way in southern Vietnam, and as we know, it was that way, or it is that way, in southern Afghanistan. It is almost as if we have seen our shadow, and we are demanding of our shadow, you, too, can grow up to be an American. You don't have to stay in this backwards, agrarian, deferential caste system. You too can embrace democracy, and you too can rise from the ashes of poverty. And these people look at us and they say, no, we're not going to do that. And what's our response? What do we say in response? Yes, you will. You will by way of either reason or force. And what does it always devolve into? Force. We're going to force you to do it. Half the marriages in this country break up because people realize if I want to change somebody and they don't want to change, I'm not going to be able to change them. Period. I either have to live with it or I have to move on. But when it comes to foreign policy, hell, by the butt of that rifle or the barrel of that rifle, these people are going to change. We'll show them. Didn't work in Vietnam, didn't work in Afghanistan. What I believe to be so ironic about all of this is the fact that they are us and we are them. Take the nationality out of it. Take the regionality out of it. Take religion out of it. Take culture out of it. Strip away all these labels and then look at these people that we've been fighting. What do you hear from people in this country all the time? Particularly when it comes to guns, right? We associate guns with personal freedom in the United States. What do you hear from people all the time then about their guns? They'll take my gun out of my cold, dead hand. Right? You come down on me, you bring the force of will of the government down on me, I'm going to fight you to the end. Try and take my personal freedom, you'll have to do it again with the butt of a rifle or the barrel of a rifle. So we believe ourselves to have the same force of will, the same type of conviction, the same type of fortitude of these Afghans, of these Vietnamese. This is how we would react if some major foreign power invaded our country. Well, dear listener, I submit to you, is it true? Do you believe that it's true? I do not. It's easy to tweet out your sense of will and resistance. It's easy to put some kind of post on Facebook about how you have this internal fortitude and they'll have to pry your gun from your cold, dead hand. That's the easy part. The hard part is living it, particularly when you're faced with the force, the weight of a first world superpower? What if all of these Americans lost the use of their car, or in particular, their pickup truck? What if not only could they not get the types of food they wanted, but they would be limited to perhaps 1-2 meals a day? What happens if that nice warm bed goes away and all of those amenities, the running water, the electricity, they're all gone? What if, by way of the environment that you live in, you're only sleeping maybe 4 hours every couple of nights? Are you a pry my gun out of my cold dead hand after all of that? Dear listener, I believe our reality to be that, again, of cognitive dissonance, of an extreme dichotomy. We are spoiled. We have the luxury now, by way of the sacrifice of our forefathers, of our ancestors, we have every single thing that we've ever wanted. But that's not enough. We also want to have the self-image of those ancestors, of those forefathers, of people that would face any adversity, any hardship, and have the fortitude to come out the other side victors. That self-image is a luxury while enjoying every other luxury, every other creature comfort that a first world superpower can provide. And that dichotomy, that cognitive dissonance, leads me into my next point. What have we learned? We're going to do this again, aren't we? We are going to do this again. What you have seen by way of the media, what you have read, what you feel, what have we learned? What have we learned from this? I'm hearing all this exposition about how the soldiers fought for nothing and many of them feel betrayed. I'm sorry. I don't feel any sympathy for them. I feel absolutely no sympathy for them. And you want to know why? Because those soldiers could have called any one of the Vietnam vets and asked them what happened to you. Think about it, dear listener. Think about it. We completely ignored a generation of people in the military who had experienced this exact same thing. So while I do feel it is tragic that so many people in the military went through so many difficult experiences and have now come out on the other side wondering what the hell was it all for, think about it. They are not unique. Their brothers and sisters in the military, not 25 years, 30 years prior, went through the same exact experience, and we had no national, we had no institutional, we had no historical understanding of what happened. If any 31-year-old veteran from Afghanistan were to reach out to me, I would say the first thing that you need to do is not go out and find a support group for people who had served in Afghanistan. Go out and find a support group of people that had served in Vietnam. You need to be the bellwether. You need to be the barometer. You need to be the one who goes out and demands that we refuse to forget. Because as bad as it looks on television, in the year 2021, things will progress. Things will continue forward. And we will forget. You want to know how I know that? Because we already forgot about the war in Vietnam. We did the exact same thing in Afghanistan not 30 years later. The exact same thing. We supported a government that the people hated. We supported a government that the people knew was corrupt as hell. We continued to feed that government money when we knew all they were doing was embezzling it. We spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, nation building. We spent hundreds of billions of dollars building a military, building a police force that the people had absolutely no confidence in, that the people knew was corrupt and did not have the national interest of the country or of the citizenry at its heart or in its mission. We took on an opponent in the Vietnamese that had a 1,000-year history of struggle against foreign oppressors. Did we understand that as a nation? No. Did we understand that as a military? No. Did we understand that as a body politic? Did our politicians understand the history of that region? No. But we had the hubris. Hey, even if these people have resisted foreign powers for 1,000 years, they won't be able to resist us. Go look it up. The Vietnamese actually gave the Mongols problems. The Mongols. The fucking Mongols. You heard of those folks? Genghis Khan, if you do not submit, we'll kill every living thing within 100 square mile radius of where you're at? Yeah, those folks. The Mongols invaded Vietnam not once, but twice. After the second failure, they just gave up. Where else did the Mongols actually experience problems in their conquest and subjugation of a region? Oh, that's right, Afghanistan! Again, you're going to hear about modern history. You're going to hear about the Soviets or the British. Folks, the fucking Mongols killed all life in their path if you did not submit. The Mongols actually conquered the area of Afghanistan not once, but twice, and then 3 times. And you want to know why they had to keep going back? Because the Afghans wouldn't lay down. The Afghans were a perpetual problem. You can even go as far back when you're talking about Afghanistan to Alexander the Great and how, yes, he did conquer armies in that region, but Afghanistan was always a problem. And he died too quickly for it to be his problem. Alexander passes away. What were his famous words, to the extent that it's true that he said them? To the strongest, right? That's who's going to inherit my empire, the strongest. And where do they have to go to immediately implement the will of the Greeks? They had to go to Afghanistan. 1,000 years of resistance that we were going to break because, of course, we're us, right? The pattern is clear. Hubris, and then shame, and then guilt. But there are some important distinctions to make between Afghanistan and what happened in Vietnam. The South Vietnamese government was corrupt as hell. The military was corrupt as hell and was often incompetent. But when we left, the South Vietnamese army actually put up a fight. There have been lamentations and teeth gnashing over our leaving Afghanistan and leaving the people vulnerable to the Taliban. And I look at 20 years and $1 trillion worth of investment, and I watch the Afghan military, the Afghan police forces, simply throw down their weapons, throw down their equipment, throw down their uniforms, and run. To what extent am I supposed to feel like we've abandoned the people of Afghanistan? This is one of the reasons why I wanted to wait to do this piece, because I have extremely conflicting emotions when it comes to what happened in Afghanistan. Certainly I feel for those people. Certainly I feel for the citizenry. But I have a hard time being sympathetic to the fact that this nation, the United States of America, invested close to $1 trillion in the military and in the police force, and in the face of the United States leaving, in the face of the United States not being one to carry the weight of the defense of the nation, of the security of the infrastructure of the nation, the Afghans throw down their weapons, they throw down their equipment, they throw off their uniforms and run? Again, although they were incompetent and corrupt, the South Vietnamese fired rifle rounds against their communist aggressors. They fought. They died. I can't feel bad for what's going on in Afghanistan when just because it happened on a Tuesday didn't mean it wasn't going to happen on a Saturday. The fact of the matter was, We were always going to have to leave, and the fact of the matter is that the day that we left was going to be the day that the Afghan National Army, that the Afghan police forces threw down their weapons, threw down their equipment, threw down their uniforms. The timing means nothing to me. And how am I supposed to care more about this than the Afghans themselves? How am I supposed to care more for the fate of these people than those who had been empowered and entrusted to defend that nation? Are the Taliban somehow now more of an enemy, more nefarious, more evil than the communists were? The South Vietnamese stood up to their communist brethren and fought them. I can't help but feel, dear listener, that there are too many Afghans within the National Army and within the National Police that are sympathetic to the aims, to the belief system, to the ultimate rule of the Taliban. This is a very important distinction because as many Afghans as I believe were sympathetic to what the United States was trying to do, that wanted to have a different country, there are far more Afghans that are comfortable living under the Taliban. And this is a problem that we were never going to be able to get around. Democracy has a huge flaw, has a huge vulnerability. And you know what that is? It's the will of the people, the majority of the people. This happened in Egypt when Egypt went through the Arab Spring. And they had what we thought was this revolution and then this evolution into democratic principles. And then they had a national election where they elected a president that was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, of an extremist Islamic group. The military then threw the guy out, subverting the very democratic principles that the United States has supported and that so many people had come out to protest in the Arab Spring. What is the will of the people of Afghanistan? Yes, it is tragic to see all the people trying to escape, try to leave Afghanistan in light of the U.S. withdrawal in Kabul. I believe that this country has an obligation to these people. Just like we did in South Vietnam, we need to take as many of those people as we can in the withdrawal. But is that the majority of the people of the country of Afghanistan? How could it be if the police, if the army has no will whatsoever to fight, to stand up to the Taliban? I do have one final thought, and that is on the withdrawal. And again, we have no institutional memory in this country. We don't know our history. I was very surprised at how disorganized the withdrawal was, given the fact that the administration, that the president had said, we're leaving. I have seen quotes that Biden, the president, has made specific to the withdrawal from South Vietnam and how much of a disaster that was. And unfortunately, his comments weren't, hey, the withdrawal from South Vietnam was a disaster and we can avoid as much in Afghanistan. It was, people will soon forget. That's right. People will soon forget. Nixon and Kissinger were not held to account. People soon forgot. Leads me back full circle. Biden will not suffer any political consequences for the fact that this withdrawal was a complete and total clusterfuck. Why? Because among the few that actually care to know, Biden does understand history. Biden is aware of what happened. And he is correct. Yes, our withdrawal from South Vietnam was a complete and total disaster. And it was soon forgotten, just as our withdrawal from Afghanistan will be. And yes, dear listener, we're going to do it all over again.
Act to impeach Joe Biden.
The U.S. House of Representatives has the power to impeach the President of the United States. This authority has been exercised in the United States of America 4 times. 4 times did the U.S. House of Representatives actually move to impeach a president whereby there was a trial in the Senate on those impeachment charges. Who was impeached? Andrew Johnson was impeached. In what? In 1868. Bill Clinton was impeached in 1998, and Donald Trump was impeached twice. Yes, I understand that there were impeachment charges for Richard Nixon that were filed by the U.S. House of Representatives, but he resigned before there was ever a trial in the Senate. So let's look at the entire history of impeachment for the United States of America. It happened once over 100 years ago, and now it's happened 3 times in the last 20 years. When Bill Clinton was impeached in 1998, young Patrick was beating his chest about all of the things that Bill Clinton had done that were worthy of impeachment and how he was going to be convicted in the Senate and he'd be thrown out of office. And I was in graduate school at the time, and I had a professor who, as a historian, as an author, as someone who understood American politics, realized and communicated as much to not only his undergraduate students, but his graduate students, that once Pandora's box is opened, you cannot close it. You do not get to control it. You've heard me say this numerous times on this podcast. Once you open Pandora's box, you do not get to control it. You think you get to use that power for your own aims. That's what we always want. We always want to be able to wield the power for what we believe is the good, and then we want to be able to put it away when we no longer feel it needs to be wielded. But that's not how it works. Once Pandora's box is opened, it is open for all, and you do not get to control how that power is used. So in the year 1998, this wise, this sage, this prescient professor said, don't root for this type of power to be exercised against the executive office. Because once it becomes part of the lexicon, once this exercise of power becomes politicized, it will be used in ways that people did not think it would be used, and it will be used all too frequently, thereby reducing its overall power, thereby reducing the effect of what it was intended for, to remove an executive officer who had turned against the people. Now, granted, I understand that the power of impeachment can also be used against other officials. It's not simply for the President of the United States. You can actually, we as the people, our representatives, the U.S. House of Representatives, can impeach other types of government officials, namely judges. But this power has been popularized. The notion of impeachment has been popularized by way of the executive branch. Again, starting with Bill Clinton in 1998 and then culminating in 2 impeachment trials for Donald Trump. Joe Biden makes a phone call to Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, who, by the way, as I just mentioned in the previous piece, and we've known for close to 20 years, is corrupt as hell. And based on this phone call, now you've got cries that the U.S. House of Representatives should file articles of impeachment against Joe Biden and that there should be a trial in the Senate. The very same people who are making those calls, who are crying, who are gnashing their teeth, these were the same people who called the impeachment charges against Donald Trump ridiculous and that it was a complete and total waste of time. Now that impeachment has been politicized, it has also been trivialized. Yes, trivialized, dear listener. This has no teeth. Bill Clinton got impeached for lying about a blowjob. That's why he got impeached. And that went to the trial that we all remember in the Senate, whereby he had to answer a number of questions in a lawyerly fashion, and we got one of the most impressive legal statements that's ever been made in any society, in any circumstance, in any context. It depends, our former president said. It depends on what the meaning of the word is. Whenever I see someone taking the law too seriously, I always hearken back to that fateful phrase. It depends on what the meaning of the word is. That sums up the law better than any 10 legal philosophers ever has. Should Joe Biden be impeached for whatever he said on a phone call with Hamid Karzai? No, absolutely not. It trivializes the entire premise of impeachment. It trivializes the power and the authority bestowed on the U.S. House of Representatives and the United States Senate. It turns this tool into something that is so politicized that as citizens, we will no longer respect the fact that a president is being impeached. Now, over the course of the last several weeks, I've gone through what I would call a life-changing transformation. Part of that being a spiritual retreat I took, part of that being the fact that I got COVID. And yes, I'm going to address both in upcoming podcasts. I say this only to raise an issue with you that I think is occurring right now, and that is the universe is always trying to achieve balance. That vibration, that energy is out there. And whether or not it's through political forums or social forums, the universe is always moving toward balance. And what's happened in U.S. politics in particular, but I think you've seen it all over the world, is that the executive branch of power in a number of Western democracies has become more authoritative and more autocratic. Because of our demands for change, because of our demands on government, we have allowed as people more power to be bestowed on the executive branch. The executive branch can get things done. We want a leader to take control. Is that what we've gotten over the course of the last 15, 20 years? We've gotten presidents who've taken control, who've taken power, and used it for what purpose? For what end? To serve the office that they were in, to reassure their opportunity to be elected again. This power is not being exercised in service of the citizens or the people. So while I'm concerned about the fact that the power of impeachment bestowed upon the U.S. House of Representatives and the United States Senate in our Constitution is now being trivialized, is now being politicized, it is in fact a tool of balance. It is a way that the legislative branch can now exercise power over the executive branch, which has assumed so much power over the course of the last 20 or 30 years. It is a way to make the executive branch accountable for the things that it's doing. Now, do I believe that this is a good precedent? Frankly, no, I do not. It speaks of a boy that cries wolf type syndrome, where we're going to have impeachment trials for president after president for matters that, in the grand scheme of things, are somewhat trivial and not worthy of actually taking this person out of an office that the people elected him or her to serve. But in the short term, in terms of the universe achieving balance, it is a way that the legislative branch can provide a check on the power of the executive branch. Given the fact that the legislative branch has given away so much power, that the judicial branch has given away so much power to the executive over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, there are very few tools left that these branches of government have to exercise any type of check on the power of the President of the United States. Maybe just the threat of impeachment and the continued threat of impeachment will allow the legislative branch to exercise some check on the executive branch when it comes to the exercise of power, the exercise of authority that has been assumed by the executive branch. The flip side of it is then it puts the pressure back on the legislative branch once they've put that check, once they've used this tool to check the power and authority of the executive branch, it puts the pressure back on the legislative branch to do what? To legislate, to actually come up with laws to come up with solutions for the American people that will then be simply rubber stamped by the executive branch. Is the legislative branch ready for as much? By way of what we've seen over the course of the last 8 to 10 years? Hell no. The legislative branch is not ready to legislate. The legislative branch is not ready to take back power. The optimist in me wants to see the use of impeachment as the first step in order for the legislative branch to begin to assume the role that it had in this country periodically over its history, the body exercising the most authority on behalf of the American people. The realist in me sees this as just a tool for different political parties to use to do what? To satisfy their base, to preach to the choir. We all need to be careful what we wish for, because damn it, one day we might just get it.
Act 3, I had COVID.
I went to Costa Rica on a vacation, on what was a spiritual journey, which I will cover in another podcast episode, because part of my spiritual journey ended up with me having COVID. I took an antigen test to come back into the United States of America, and I tested positive for COVID. Did I feel bad at the time? No, really I didn't. I was tired, but who isn't tired at the end of a week-long vacation? Within 36 hours, the Delta variant sank its teeth into me. And so I had to quarantine in a small condominium in Tamarindo in Costa Rica, where I proceeded to lose roughly 15 pounds in 11 days. Many of the people who listen to this podcast know me personally, and you know that I'm a pretty healthy guy. I exercise frequently. It is not uncommon for me to actually sweat during the course of exercise. In what little time I did sleep, I would wake up lying in a pool of sweat, going through very, very violent cold sweats. The brain fog is real. The aches and pains are real. Thankfully, I never lost my sense of smell. I never lost my sense of taste. Yes, as I have discussed on this podcast in a prior episode, I have been vaccinated. Did that help? Perhaps it did. Perhaps having been vaccinated was the reason why I never lost my sense of taste, my sense of smell. But beyond that, the Delta variant didn't give a damn that I'd been vaccinated. I was as sick from that variant as I have been from any flu that I can ever remember. Strangely, or perhaps not strangely, as I'm going through this, as I'm alone, as I'm having these cold sweats, as I'm losing weight rapidly, I'm getting information via the telephone, via the Google machine, about how, well, the government now may require a booster shot. Or if you've had the vaccine, you may have to get a third shot. When I received my vaccination, I was told it was part of the popular culture lexicon that this vaccine will not only help with the current COVID pandemic, but these new variants that are coming out, it should help with those as well. You should be protected not only against this current COVID outbreak, but against these new variants. I'm really not going to go on a tangent. I'm not going to get upset. The fact of the matter is, the government, these health agencies, they just don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't know how things are going to develop in this pandemic. They just don't know. And they don't have the courage to tell us that they don't know. They want to provide us some level of certainty. Maybe it's us. Maybe we're so desperate for certainty, we'll believe anything that they tell us. But the fact of the matter is, they don't know. That has been well documented, well evidenced by the fact that the story from the government, from health officials, it continues to change. There's no consistency. In writing out this piece and thinking about it, I'm not sure again whether or not it's the fear in these government officials, these bureaucrats, these health officials. Is it their fear? Is it their fear that they can't come out and say that they don't know? Or are they actually better channeling us, better channeling the public and our fear of an uncertain future. Are we mature enough as a population to actually hear, hey, we don't know. We're not sure how this is going to play out. Sick as hell, lying in a pool of my own sweat in a bed in Costa Rica, hell, I'm blaming the government. I'm blaming the health officials. Reflecting on it now, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that the fear is not within us as a community, as a population of people. The fear of uncertainty, of not being able to say, this is when we're all going to be able to go back to normal. Normal. It brings me to my next point, that this is the new normal. It hit me like a ton of bricks because I have been hopeful that we're going to go back to January, February, March of 2020. But, dear listener, this is the new normal. COVID is basically the flu. It is a more virulent, it is a more dangerous form of the flu. And there's never been a cure for the flu. Why is that? Because it's a virus. It morphs. Every year it changes. Flu shots have been around for decades, and the flu sticks around, doesn't it? And some people get the flu, and some people don't. To the extent that those flu shots have been helpful, it's never gotten rid of the flu. And to the extent that these vaccines are helpful, I'm not denying their efficacy, but they're not going to get rid of COVID. They're not going to be able to turn the Delta variant into something that is a temporary condition. I think we have to be adults about this. I think we have to be mature about it. And I think we have to realize this is the new normal. So in furtherance of that, I'm going to tell you what I took in order to try to mitigate or lessen the effects of the Delta variant on me over the course of the time that I was quarantined in Costa Rica. Yes, I read up on all the things that I took, and yes, I understand that there's going to be people from the National Institute of Health or the FDA that are going to say, well, the efficacy of these things has not yet been proven. When you are as sick as I was, as sick as people have been from COVID, or particularly from this Delta variant, you don't give a damn about the efficacy of whether or not these things have been properly tested over the course of the last 48 to 60 months. Please remember, as we have just discussed, the government, these health organizations, these doctors are having an extremely difficult time communicating information because they keep talking out of both sides of their mouth. Things haven't been yet approved. Things haven't been properly vetted or tested. And yet here we are rolling out these vaccines that really haven't been properly vetted or tested. That their approval is only conditional upon the fact that they are trying to curb a pandemic. I tested positive for COVID. I got sick. I took a bunch of pills. I felt better in pretty short order, and I was able to re-enter the United States of America, having then received a negative COVID test not 10 days later. Those pills are as follows. Yes, simple vitamin D. I was taking 10,000 milligrams of vitamin D a day. I also took a Z-Pak, your simple 5-day zithromycin antibiotic. I also took a prescription of prednisone for 7 days, the steroid, prednisone. And yes, ivermectin, 3 milligrams 4 times a day for 5 days. Now, prescriptions are fun. They make doctors feel important. They make medical companies feel like they're going through some sort of approval process, that there is a distribution or sharing of risk. Everyone's signing on to what these medications can do and who can get them. When you're sitting there sweating through all of your clothes, sick with fever, with chills, you've dropped weight like you've been in one of these Uyghur concentration camps in China, or you've been in some prison camp in North Korea, you want the medication. You are going to have to doctor shop. It's that simple. There is no ally. You don't have a friend. They're either going to write you a prescription or they're not. Ivermectin, 3 milligrams 4 times a day for 5 days. Prednisone, Z-Pak, vitamin D. Take heed, dear listener. This is the new normal. This is going to be like getting the flu. I hope that I am wrong. I hope that by 2022, we do see some return to normal. But given everything that's happened over the course of at least the last 18 months, do you have any faith in that? Do you believe that somehow this virus is going to be, quote unquote, defeated and will thereby no longer pose a threat in the future? I hope for the best, but damn it, I'm going to plan for the worst.
Act 4. The University of Tennessee played a football game.
The University of Tennessee, its once glorious football program, this football program played a football game. Did they win that football game? Yes, they did. Did they play a capable? Did they play a challenging? Did they play an equal or better adversary? No, they did not. They played and beat Bowling Green. The Bowling Green Falcons, you ask, from the Mid-American Conference? Yes, one and the same. The Bowling Green Falcons that won exactly 0 contests the year prior? Yes, one and the same. The Bowling Green Falcons that over the course of the past 3 seasons have had 100 total players leave the program and enter the transfer portal to go and play somewhere else. Yes, one and the same. You mean the Bowling Green Falcons football team? Stop asking questions. They're bad. Bad football team. Tennessee played and beat bad football team. You never pushed your sibling down the steps when they weren't paying attention? You never yelled at or otherwise inflicted bodily harm to a dog or a cat out of frustration? Felt good, didn't it? Felt good exercising some power, watching your sibling fall down those steps. You've never reveled in the cat screech as it scampered away? Let's be clear, folks. Sometimes in your progression, in your personal growth, you need to push a weaker person down. Does it make you feel better in the moment? Yes. Is it only a temporary fix? Yes. Are there consequences for such an action? Consequences aplenty. Those consequences for the University of Tennessee will soon manifest. That's right. Sometimes your siblings, well, they continue to grow too. Just like some Pashtun in Afghanistan sitting on a mountain. Long memories. Before you know it, you're the one falling down those steps. The Alabamas, the Floridas, the Georgias, they await. But let's examine this beating of a little sister of the poor. The University of Tennessee ran the ball very well against what is an inferior defensive opponent. Their quarterback, a transfer from the University of Michigan named Joe Milton, unfortunately did not connect on many a long pass that he had an opportunity to connect on. This has been a troubling deficiency for the University of Tennessee for at least 10 years. Cannot consistently throw football downfield to other football player. So Tennessee's offense was again very one-dimensional. Simply being able to run the ball is not an option against SEC caliber opponents. As a somewhat delusional fan that has the same type of mentality as a battered spouse, I keep coming back to hope. That's right, hope. Hope springs eternal in the infancy of a new football season. It's the first game of the season. The passing game has not yet gelled. Perhaps it will get better as the season progresses. Of course, this passing game did not perform against a quite inferior opponent, and therefore it will have to gel, it will have to get better, it will have to begin to perform against much better opponents as the season progresses. Is that a logically consistent position? No, it's not. No, it's not. I, like you, dear listener, am a sports fan. I have completely and diametrically opposed opinions. I have completely and diametrically opposed hopes for the teams that I root for. Passing game doesn't work against the Little Sisters of the Poor? No worries. No bother. It'll get better against teams that can actually defend against the pass. In the immortal words of Thomas Fuller, a fool's paradise is a wise man's hell. It's going to be a long season. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.